Hello everyone and welcome to Wrestling with Regret. Like I said on Tuesday, I think we in the year 2016 need to go on a bit of a break from each other. From wrestling to real life and everywhere in between, this year was chock full of some of the most insane stuff to happen like ever. But thank God, at least there were some redeeming things in WWE this year. Let's look at what I thought were some of the best. Number 8. Smackdown is relevant again. Since it began this summer, the brand split 2.0 has had its share of issues, but one of the positives that's come out of all this is that Smackdown is once again appointment television. A year ago at this time, there was no reason to watch Smackdown. It became a glorified Raw clip show with repeat matches from Monday thrown in for good measure. But with a set of writers, wrestlers, and storylines by and large completely different than Raw's, Smackdown has become unique and watchable. What's going on now is the same thing we saw in the original brand split, at least for the first year or so, that made that one so cool. We have begun to see new names come to the forefront that might not have been there if it weren't a roster split. Also, at this moment, we haven't seen that much inter-brand stuff going on, so SmackDown is still kind of its own little show. Now, across both shows, the women's and tag divisions have struggled since they're being stretched too thin, and the main storylines on SmackDown have kind of outlived their usefulness, in my opinion. But when it comes to SmackDown, things are looking better for the Blue brand as we head into 2017. Number 7. Dolph Ziggler vs. The Miz and Heath Slater, free agent. These are my two favorite storylines this year, but instead of trying to pick one over the other for this countdown, I decided to lump them together for this one entry. They are both great, but for different ways. We got to see sides of Dolph Ziggler and The Miz we had never seen before, both in terms of promo style and athleticism. I mean, both guys brought the house down every time they wrestled. As far as the Heath Slater angle goes, at first after the draft I hated it, but it really grew on me eventually. I loved seeing him get more promo time and showing his passion and his drive, his quest, his fight for his livelihood was something that fans really could get behind. His unlikely partnership with Rhino made for good TV, all capping off with him and Rhino becoming the first SmackDown Tag Team Champions. The Heath Slater getting himself a job. You know, what started out to me as boring and became one of my favorite storylines of the year. Number 6. James Ellsworth. Okay, so on Tuesday I explained why he was one of the worst things to happen to the company this year, but Ellsworth's time on the main roster hasn't been completely devoid of good moments. People like James Ellsworth because he's managed to succeed in a place where people like him often never do. They see a guy like him and say, oh, if that guy can do it, there's hope for me. He's inspirational. Ellsworth has breathed new life and hope to indie wrestlers all over the country, for better or for worse, that if you're in the right place at the right time, there may be a spot for you yet. Yes, Ellsworth absolutely overstayed his welcome in the main event scene, and in the end, he's probably going to end up no higher on the totem pole than Santino Marella ever did. But he's now one of the most over guys on the show simply by looking weird and getting beat up. And that's pretty impressive. Number 5. The ladies get to shine. The Divas Revolution of 2015 totally sucked. Fans of women's wrestling had to sit through 6 months of hot garbage before finally coming out on the other side in 2016. This year saw the true coronation of women like Becky Lynch, Sasha Banks, and Charlotte as they began to dominate the women's wrestling scene. They've all had great matches with each other, then throw in matches with Bayley and Asuka, great contributions for women like Naomi and Carmella and Alexa Bliss. Even Nikki Bella has surprised me this year. In the latter half of this year, we've seen women main eventing Raws and a pay-per-view. We've seen a Hell in a Cell match, a tables match, no DQ, Falls Count Anywhere, an Iron Man match, all featuring women. Finally, women are no longer seen as the sideshow, the piss break of wrestling anymore. That's for the cruiserweights, am I right? The women who can actually work are finally getting the attention and the recognition they deserve. Yes, we have seen Sasha Banks and Charlotte fight way too much this year, but you can't argue that their matches have been bad. And yes, the company has been patting themselves a little too hard in the back this year over the women's division, but looking at the caliber of talent they have, you can't blame them. Number 4. NXT Takeover Dallas. If you watched part 1 of this week's countdown, you would know that WrestleMania 32 was, how shall I put this, terrible, and it was only made worse by the fact that I had to follow this show, one of the best of the year. Takeover Dallas, in my opinion, was the pinnacle of NXT's golden era on one of the biggest possible stages. 4 amazing matches that kept the crowd hot all night, and even Aries and Corbin was good for what it was. Yet American Alpha finally arriving and winning the tag team titles. Bayley and Asuka had a hell of a match for the women's title. My God, I've said all year that Sami Zayn and Shinsuke Nakamura is a match of the year candidate. And even with all the stoppages for blood, the title match between Samoa Joe and Finn Balor was quite possibly one of my favorites in the series. The blood really added so much drama and tension. I was almost thinking for a second they're going to throw the match out because the blood was so severe and they couldn't stop it. I was like, oh my God, and then they kept going, and it was great because of that. For being one of the best overall shows this year, NXT TakeOver Dallas has definitely earned a spot on this list. And speaking of lists, number 3, Chris Jericho. Is there any wrestler on either brand having as good a year right now as Chris Jericho? Sure, he hasn't won any championships, and now that I think about it, he hasn't won that many matches at all, but I can't remember a time he's ever been as over as he is right now. In previous years, Jericho would come back for a bit, lose to some newcomers, leave, and that was that. But in this his 8th or 9th return, I feel like things are finally different. I mean, like I said in my Best Talkers countdown a few weeks ago, this man has gotten fans to go nuts for a clipboard. For the word it. For scars. Through the good times and the bad, his chemistry with Kevin Owens this year has been amazing. He's been the glue holding the year's top storyline on Raw together. But the character and the catchphrase are just one part of it. I feel like he's been having some of the best matches of his career this year. They're no Jericho Michaels of '08, but I've loved his stuff with AJ Styles and Sami Zayn and Seth Rollins and Cesaro. Even his stuff with Roman Reigns has been fun to watch. I'm hoping for big things for Y2J in 2017. Number 2. The Rise of the Internet Darlings. This entry is not to be confused with my upcoming event at WrestleMania weekend in Orlando, the Internet Darlings Live, which, by the way, just added Matthew from Botchamania to its all-star panel. Get your tickets at the link below. For what feels like forever, fans have attacked WWE for not signing all their favorite indie guys, and perhaps more annoyingly, have preemptively attacked the company for not using them up to their full potential. But after this year, I can say that a lot of those fears are probably being assuaged. In 2016, you've had Samoa Joe, Finn Balor and Shinsuke Nakamura each hold the NXT title. Balor and Kevin Owens have been the Universal Champions, yet Sasha, Becky, Bayley, and Asuka all hold Women's Championships. Gargano and Ciampa just won the NXT Tag titles. Dean Ambrose was the champion. AJ Styles is the champion after having an awesome feud with John Cena before that. I mean, is this WWE or Ring of Honor? Though some will argue the company is trying to cater to a vocal minority of fans of these booking decisions to the detriment of the company, to me it's amazing that the company is finally taking a chance on these individuals that they didn't create themselves. A far cry from what would have happened 5 to 10 years ago. And sure, they might not lead us to another golden age, but then again, they might. And the number one best thing in WWE in 2016 was the Cruiserweight Classic. This year, WWE completely changed the way they do business and put on programming. They dedicated an entire season to promoting an international who's who of some of the best unsigned talent in wrestling as part of the Cruiserweight Classic. A whole new legion of fans introduced to guys like Zack Sabre Jr., Kota Ibushi, Akira Tozawa, Johnny Gargano, Tommaso Ciampa, and more. Older fans were reintroduced to guys like Brian Kendrick and Tajiri. The presentation of the matches was done in a way WWE has never done before, presenting them as legitimate sport. The announce team, Mauro Ranallo and Daniel Bryan, they were passionate and knowledgeable about the product, something a far cry from what you hear on the main roster these days, and the matches themselves were exciting, fast-paced, and often took your breath away. The coolest thing about the Cruiserweight Classic was who they got for the tournament. It wasn't a bunch of guys who were already signed with the company. It was a bunch of outsiders, people who, for years and years, didn't fit the traditional mold of what a WWE wrestler should be. By getting a bunch of guys with indie and international cred, the company immediately expanded their reach across wrestling fandom. They've established they're no longer just cookie-cutter wrestling anymore. They still do a lot of that, mind you, but baby steps. And between the Cruiserweight Classic, NXT, and the recently announced UK Championship Tournament, you could argue WWE is helping fans find out more about independent wrestling, which in turn helps out those smaller organizations. For giving fans a glimpse into what the best independent and global wrestlers can do with a high-quality presentation that is the company's trademark, and for giving some of wrestling's unsung heroes a chance to shine, the Cruiserweight Classic is my pick for the best thing to happen to the company in 2016. Got any other nominees for the best of the year? Let me know in the comments section below. Be sure to thumbs up this video if you like it, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, and buy the t-shirts at ProWrestlingTees.com. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time. Oh yeah, one more thing. Broken Matt Hardy was the best thing to happen in all of wrestling this year, and I don't care what you think. Ha ha!